You won't believe what happened in that courtroom. It was one of those mornings when the air is thick before anything even starts. Like everyone in the building understands something huge is going to go down. The doors of the courthouse opened early, and the line of people started. Not only lawyers and courthouse personnel, but nosy bystanders, journalists, and lifelong sister wives watchers who simply wanted to see this happen for themselves. By the time the hearing was prepared to begin, seats were filled to capacity. Standing at the center of everything was Kody Brown, the man America has seen for years as the outspoken, assertive father of the Sister Wives clan. But today, no cameras were there to provide him with a studio audience to make him look larger than life, to provide TLC editing to soften his words. This is not a staged family meeting on a plush sofa. This is the real thing: legal papers, sworn testimony, and a judge who is there to pass judgment, not to entertain. Christine Brown and Janelle Brown sat separately across the room, a stern but potent presence. These were two women who for years had been integral components of Kody's family, cooking dinner, raising the children, dealing with domestic duties, and assisting in creating the shared life that audiences believed they understood. On television, they had smiled their way through moments of tension, laughed on vacations with the kids, and collaborated for the children's benefit. But off the air, fissures had developed over years. Now, there was no scripted family chit-chat, no carefully crafted words for the camera. This was bigger than a relationship. It was about justice. After decades of joint living, joint earnings, and joint sacrifices, Christine and Janelle felt they had been left with less than their due. And they weren't going to walk away quietly. They were here to fight. The tension was thick enough to feel in your bones. A few fans whispered to each other before the judge entered. But the second that gavel came down, the room fell silent. The judge's presence was commanding, a seasoned professional who had no interest in reality TV drama. He was here for facts, evidence, and truth. From the very beginning, you could feel something was off. Kody's characteristic confidence wasn't happening here. On the show and in interviews, Kody tended to walk around with a booming voice, a stern posture, and an air of knowing something everyone else didn't. Here his body tension was more compact. His shoulders were ever so slightly rolled forward, his eyes darting around the room. He replied to the first couple of questions with that typical energy, but it wasn't long before the cracks began to appear. The judge's eyes were cold, unflinching. Every response Kody made was met with a second question, one that burrowed deeper, one that asked for specifics rather than anecdotes. It was apparent within moments that this was not Kody's domain. In Sister Wives' world, he could steer the conversation. Here the conversation was in the hands of the law. Christine and Janelle sat silently, their lawyers doing the bulk of the talking at the moment. But you could see the wear of the years on their faces. Not anger, nor smugness, but the quiet determination of two women who had waited a long time for this moment. There was a moment early in the questioning when the judge questioned Kody for specific figures on property and investment inputs. Kody paused, squirming in his seat. His responses, though assertive in tone, did not appear to align with the documents Christine and Janelle's attorneys were clutching. You could almost hear the room lean in. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calm, measured words held an authority that somehow seemed to reduce the space around Kody. "Mr. Brown," the judge said, "I require clear, specific responses. His isn't family dynamics. This is about documented contributions and legal contracts." It was a line that seemed to establish the tone for the whole day. From the gallery, you could sense glances darting between Kody and the two women sitting in front of him. Christine's hands lay serenely in her lap. Janelle would sometimes scribble some notes, her face intent. They weren't here to exchange blows with words. Their side had facts, and they were letting those facts speak for themselves. Their lawyers had shelves full of binders, each crisply tabbed and labeled, packed with years' worth of documents, property deeds, financial reports, and even ancient email messages that vividly illustrated the deals cut and promises made. The lawyers would interrupt Kody whenever he attempted to make a general observation about how the family worked and steer him back to the documents. And this is where the distinction between reality TV and reality came crashing down. In Sister Wives' realm, feelings can dictate the moment. A loud voice, a heartfelt oration, even tears, they can all shift the course of conversation. But in court, everything is about what can be substantiated. It was early in the hearing, but already you could sense that the burden was shifting to Christine and Janelle. Not because they were louder or more confrontational, but because their argument was based on sound, organized facts. There was one question that brought the audience to quiet gasp. The judge inquired about a specific plot of land Janelle had sunk a lot of money into. Kody replied in a way that implied the land was still a shared family resource. But Janelle's lawyer simply pushed a paper across the table with her name, payments, and agreed upon interest, all documented and signed years before. The judge studied the paper for a full minute, then again at Kody. "This is the kind of clarity we need," he said, his tone even but unyielding. Kody nodded, but you could see it in his eyes. This wasn't unfolding as he had anticipated. As the first hour passed, Christine and Janelle had not said a word. They did not have to. Their sitting down was testimony enough. Two women who once stood together with Kody in family solidarity now across from him in legal opposition, ready to take this to the end. By the time the court adjourned for its first recess, the tone had been established. This was not going to be a fast, emotional case. This was going to be deliberate. Every allegation was going to be supported by evidence. And for Kody, every word was going to be cross-examined, challenged, and verified against the document. In that instant, it was obvious to everyone who was watching the power had shifted. On television, Kody was always at the center of the action. In this courtroom, he was merely one individual out of three stakeholders, and the law was the one authoring the script now. In order to comprehend this courtroom struggle, we must rewind the clock. Not a few months, but years. Because what was unfolding in that courthouse wasn't an all-night grudge match. It was the explosion of a storm that had been simmering behind closed doors, layer by layer, for years. To much of America, Kody Brown was the self-assured, camera-savvy patriarch of sister wives, the guy who managed to keep 4 wives, 18 kids, and a tangled web of relationships going in a manner that provided compelling television. The drama, the arguments, the makeups, it was all there on TLC for everyone to watch. But here's the thing about reality shows: what you get on television is never the full picture. Amid all those beautifully shot family gatherings and scripted-sounding heart-to-hearts, there was a whole different kind of tension. And while viewers were tuning in to see tearful confessions and dinner gatherings, something much darker was going on behind the camera. It didn't occur overnight. It started with little things at first. Christine not being heard in family decisions, Janelle feeling like her input wasn't being valued, and both women seeing as Robin gained more and more control over what Kody decided. The breaking point for Christine in 2021. She'd been candid, on and off stage, about being overlooked in her marriage. She desired more than joint time. She desired a partner. But Kody's energy, she believed, was more and more directed elsewhere. So, she did something that surprised the fan base. She left. And when Christine walked out, she didn't leave a marriage behind. She left a lifestyle. Plural marriage had been her lifestyle for more than 25 years, and leaving behind meant beginning over in almost every aspect. But it also meant answering the question, what do we do with everything we built together? She remained for a time. She had always been the business-savvy one in the family, the one who managed much of the financial detail. But she was also heavily invested in the family's collective investment, particularly the embattled Coyote Pass property in Arizona. She had sunk years of savings and effort into a dream that was rapidly disintegrating. By 2022, she and Kody's relationship had also broken down. The tensions that had been building up for years finally surfaced, and when she departed, she was left with the same question Christine had faced: how to disentangle not only from a husband, but from decades of meshed financial obligations. On the surface, the Browns appeared to be successful. Reality show salaries, publishing contracts, and public speaking fees. But in practice, finances and plural marriage aren't equal. The income from the show wasn't split equitably between all the wives. Rather, it all went into a pot, which was largely controlled by Kody. From that, it was doled out, sometimes to domestic expenses, sometimes to business ventures, sometimes to personal spending. And whereas that formula operated, or at least functioned, when everyone was together, it was a nightmare after wives began to depart. Christine insisted that she had contributed to earning that money. Her scripts, her interviews, her own presence on the show added value. Janelle insisted that her real estate investments, particularly Coyote Pass, earned her a rightful claim to the property. But Kody, he had a different view of things. He said much of the money was caught up in current expenses, debt, and future plans for the family that Christine and Janelle had abandoned. There was a trying to deal with it behind closed doors at first, talks, negotiation, mediators. But the more they dug, the more it was apparent there was no middle ground. Christine felt she was being left out of what was rightfully hers. Janelle was enraged with how Coyote Pass and other properties were dealt with. And Kody, still stubborn as ever, would not admit that either of them had the rights they thought they had. The last straw hit when documents regarding the property transfers came forward, and both of the women felt that Kody had done things that put them financially at a disadvantage. That was it. No more discussing it. No more attempts to work it out. They filed. Plural marriage situations like this don't come along often in U.S. courts, particularly when the relationships aren't legally established under the traditional model. Kody was married only legally to Robin, but that didn't invalidate the decades of shared finances with Christine and Janelle, or mean that the courts wouldn't consider their claims seriously. Christine and Janelle's legal team was strong as well. They maintained that years of financial dependence, along with shared assets and input into the show, entitled the women to equal division. They also cited the Brown family's blurred lines between personal and business finances. Kody's attorneys responded by noting that a number of these arrangements were informal, not formal contracts, and that women had no right to property in the name of his or Robin's. And so, after all the tension, all the frustrated whispers and strategic on-camera smiles, it came down to this, a high-stakes court battle. Christine and Janelle weren't in it for the cash. This was a matter of principle, of fairness, of stating, we dedicated decades of our lives to this family, and we refuse to be cut out of history that we helped create. Kody, on his part, appeared intent on standing firm, not only for reasons of money, but for the veneer of control and dominance he'd worked years to maintain. As the case opened, reporters jammed the hallways, cameras lingered outside the courthouse, and Sister Wives fans worldwide leaned in tighter to their screens. This wasn't TLC editing. This wasn't a family couch interview. This was real life, and no one knew which way it would go. When Christine and Janelle entered that courtroom, they weren't merely two women standing before their ex-husband. They were two-decade partners in a life that had been broadcast, sliced, and criticized by millions of individuals. But this wasn't reality television anymore. This was genuine reality. From the outset, their lawyers were emphatic. This was not an exercise in bitterness, gossip, or personal vendetta. This was about equity, about rising up after decades of being ignored in the very institution that they had helped to construct. Christine's lawyer began by placing down meticulous financial records, not the sort of generalities you find on TV confessionals, but spreadsheets, bank statements, contracts, and pay stubs. Page on page, year on year, each one evidencing Christine's place in the family's finance. Her team maintained that although Kody might have been the face of the family, the man the cameras trailed and the one giving interview, Christine was the backbone. She wasn't merely a wife. She was a mother to 6 children, a caretaker, a problem solver, and a co-manager of a never-ending list of household duties. They reminded the judge that Christine had assisted in keeping the family's life functioning during the taping of Sister Wives, handling everything from meals for nearly 24 people to schedules for school, church, and family activities. That kind of dedication, they claimed, was work, unpaid work, done for the good of the family. But Christine's contribution was not solely domestic. She participated in the public appearance, the book negotiation, the merchandising of the family brand, and even in contract negotiation with TLC. Without her, there would have been no full family story to pitch to the network to begin with. When it was Janelle's turn, her attorney took a different but no less persuasive tack. Her argument was centered intensely on concrete investments. Janelle was always the money-smart wife, the one who eyed budgets, real estate deals, and long-term planning. Her entourage produced documents indicating that she had spent considerable personal income on land acquisitions in Coyote Pass, Arizona, land initially offered to the wives as a family asset for the long term. Janelle's attorney contended that she had invested not only money but years of planning, meetings, and negotiation into making that land the cornerstone of the family's future. And now the family was broken apart. There were concerns as to whether she'd ever receive a return on that investment, or if it would just be left in Kody and Robin's hands. The atmosphere in the courtroom was strained, But Christine and Janelle were not vindictive. Instead, they were calm and measured in their words, which evoked sympathy from the spectators. Christine explained to the court, "This isn't about punishing Kody. It's about acknowledging that what we created together has worth. Worth that shouldn't be erased just because one person feels like the rules have changed." Janelle echoed the sentiment. "I gave my time, my money, my faith in this family's vision. I'm only asking for what's rightfully mine. Nothing more." Those words seemed to strike a chord, particularly with members of the public who were permitted to sit in the gallery. You could see heads bobbing, even the odd tear being swatted away. To them, Christine and Janelle weren't TV figures. They were women who had committed years to a relationship and were now battling for an even playing field. Kody's lawyers responded with a completely different story. Their argument was that all the financial agreements had been open and that each wife knew exactly what she was getting into. Kody himself testified and asserted that the division of assets had been equitable, citing what he characterized as mutual agreements on each breakup. He asserted that Christine and Janelle had already had their share and that anything more was merely a case of them trying to rewrite history. But as the lawyers for Christine and Janelle kept presenting evidence, Kody's defenses started to grow thin. There were receipts, emails, and even old video footage from sister wives that proved him wrong, moments in which he vowed equal land ownership, equal voice in money matters, and a future together that now appeared discarded. The tide turned when Christine's lawyer presented a string of family home emails and text messages. These weren't seen on television. They were personal messages revealing conversations about how assets would be split, how the TLC payouts would be distributed, and who would take on future liabilities. One read years ago explicitly explained that all the wives would own an equal share of the Coyote Pass property. Another depicted Janelle specifically putting money from her personal account towards a land payment, and Kody acknowledging the contribution back then. Those papers struck home. You could see Kody's face set as they were read out. Robin, sitting next to him, mouthed something into his ear, and would not look at the gallery. By now, the dynamic in the room had changed. Christine and Janelle were no longer former reality TV stars spilling dirty laundry. They were positioned as women defending fairness in a complicated and extremely atypical marital situation. The atmosphere in the public gallery was transparent. This was a battle worth witnessing. Reporters took furious notes, and more than one hushed consultation predicted that the media response was going to be explosive. Even the judge was listening more closely as the evidence mounted. While being careful to stay neutral, there was a subtle change in body position, leaning forward when Christine testified, nodding slightly at Janelle's property declarations. This was not merely about a check at the conclusion of the case. For Christine, it was about receiving respect for years of unpaid work that facilitated the family brand and Kody's celebrity to exist. For Janelle, it was about standing up for an investment she felt was as much hers as it was anybody else's. And for them both, it was about making a precedent. If they could win the case, it wouldn't only protect their own futures. It could send a message to anyone in their position that accepting defeat doesn't equal taking nothing. At the end of the day, Christine and Janelle exited side by side, their attorneys dragging heavy binders of evidence. Kody slipped out a back door, dodging reporters. But the front page headlines were already being dictated. Christine and Janelle take the stand, evidence mounts against Kody Brown. And inside that courtroom, something was becoming increasingly obvious. This battle was far from over, but the tide was finally beginning to shift. By the time the courtroom was halfway through the trial, you could sense the air was different. It wasn't a tangible one, no lights switch, no doors burst, but you could feel a tightening in the air. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, reporters ceased writing and began listening intently, and even the lawyers hesitated for just a fraction of a second longer between phrases. Something was building. The judge, a man known for his sharp legal mind and an even sharper ability to read people, set down the papers in front of him and leaned forward ever so slightly. His gaze locked on Kody Brown. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the kind of look that told everyone in the room, "We're about to get to the bottom of this." "Kody," the judge said, his tone level but firm, "I want you to sort something out for me." At that moment, you could swear you heard the soft hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Kody fidgeted in his chair, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing for the hit. His attorneys nodded to him briefly, their mindless gesture urging him to hold it together. The judge grabbed a pile of papers from the bench and started reading out loud. The documents weren't numbers on a page. They were a financial blueprint. Bank records, real estate deeds, business ledgers, and tax returns years in the making. The type of paperwork that doesn't deceive. From these records, the judge spoke slowly. Certain assets were bought with joint funds, but you said in your testimony that these assets were individual, personal investments. Which is it? Kody's answer began confidently, or so it seemed. He discussed family agreements, informal understandings, and shared visions for the future. But as he continued, his sentences became knotted. Dates became fuzzy. Facts didn't align. The consistently firm tone in his voice stumbled just enough for anyone who was carefully listening to detect. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Brown, these explanations are vague. I'm asking for specifics. The documents suggest one thing. Your statements suggest another. This inconsistency is troubling. It was a pivotal moment. Christine and Janelle did not bat an eye. They remained silent at their own tables, gazing attentively at the judge, allowing their lawyers to speak for them. With each question posed by the judge, their lawyers were prepared with precise answers, cross-referenced documents, color-coded exhibits, and timelines so accurate you could set your watch to them. Christine's attorney emphasized, "Your Honor, Exhibit 14 is a list of the specific dates and the amount contributed by each side for Coyote Pass property. It's verified by bank statements during that same time frame. Those contributions were for a joint tenancy, yet now the property deed is in Mr. Brown's name alone." Janelle's attorney continued, "In addition, Your Honor, these same monies were withdrawn from accounts which were identified as family savings in internal records, which we have introduced into evidence. This is not interpretation. It is documented fact." The judge looked over at the attorneys and at Kody. "Mr. Brown, do you disagree with these records?" Kody paused. "I don't remember every transaction," he said carefully, "but my understanding was, that's the issue." The judge cut in, his voice stern now. "Your thinking and the cost reality don't seem to match." Tension in the courtroom grew more dense. Reporters resumed scribbling, some clacking away on laptops already writing tomorrow's headlines. The gallery, a combination of family backers, curious locals, and die-hard Sister Wives devotees, leaned forward as if they were witnessing the end of a film. Christine remained calm, though her eyes did flash a hint of vindication. This wasn't about embarrassing Kody. It was about having her years of toil and sacrifice finally acknowledged in a courtroom. Janelle, being the level-headed planner that she was, laced her fingers together and allowed her attorney's detail-oriented preparation do the talking. The judge, still thumbing through papers, stopped and looked straight at Christine and Janelle. "The presentation of your case," he stated, "is impressive. Each accusation has substantiation. Each assertion has backing documentation. Clarity to such an extent is laudable." Those statements fell with great weight. To Christine and Janelle, it was confirmation. To Kody, it was a threat. And in that instant, the unwritten truth fell into place. The dominance Kody had long wielded with his family, the control he had exerted over discussions, over choices, over relationships, meant nothing here. Power in this courtroom wasn't a matter of persuasion. It was a matter of evidence. And at the moment, Christine and Janelle possessed it. Even Kody appeared to feel it. His shoulders slumped a little, the familiar flame in his eyes flickering a little less brightly. He wasn't beaten, not yet, but the tide was unmistakably shifting. The judge ordered a brief recess. As individuals rose and made their way to the hallway, the buzz was charged. Some murmured that Kody's case had just been opened up. Others wondered how much more Christine and Janelle would divulge in the next round. One thing was for sure, following this turning point, nothing in the courtroom would ever be exactly the same again. When the judge came back to the bench, the courtroom seemed heavy, charged. The shuffling of papers ceased. Even the soft hum of the overhead lights was silent. Everyone's eyes were on one man, the only human being in the room who had the authority to end this endless, draining struggle. The judge settled in, putting on his glasses and reading from a pile of papers. His tone was measured but had a gravity that caused everyone to sit a little straighter. Kody's expression was stiff, jaw clenched. Christine and Janelle sat together, hands clasped in their laps. They didn't shift or glance about. Their attention was wholly on the judge's voice. The ruling was swift, too swift for some in the courtroom to take in. The judge sided with Christine and Janelle, granting them a significant share of the contested assets, real estate, bank accounts, and investments that had been the focus of this acrimonious battle. The justification for the ruling was explained in candid, unyielding terms. The judge recognized that both women had contributed a great deal over the years, not only financially, but in unpaid work, parenting, and emotional care that kept the family going during its darkest hours. These contributions, the judge stated bluntly, cannot and will not be erased, simply because the personal relationships have ended. Christine's eyes grew wet, but she did not weep. She looked over at Janelle instead, and the two of them exchanged a glance, one of solemn, deep relief. No gloating, no victorious shout. For years of tension, months of court battles, and countless nights of doubt, this was not so much a victory march as the slamming shut of a door that had been wedged open for far too long. Kody looked stunned. He let his shoulders slouch a bit as the words began to sink in. In this room, his usual charisma and family authority carried no weight. The judge didn't care about charm. The law didn't care about the stories he told with thousands of hours of reality TV content over years. Here it was facts, documentation, and fairness, and the facts had not been his. The judge finished with a warning to all concerned. This decision is final. It is founded on the evidence heard in this court. He thanked the lawyers for their professionalism and dismissed them all. Like that, the gavel dropped, and it was done. For what felt like an eternity, no one stirred. Christine slowly let out a breath, as though she had been holding it the whole time since the trial. Janelle nodded slightly, pressing her lips together as she took in the enormity of what they had just witnessed. They stood up, collected their belongings, and exited the courtroom side by side. The corridor outside was filled with a few fans, friends, and relatives who had arrived quietly to see this day. Some hugged Janelle and Christine, others merely squeezed their hands in quiet solidarity. Cameras were in attendance too. After all, when you've spent most of your adult life living on a reality television show, you never get the luxury of privacy, even on a day like this. Christine spoke first to the reporters. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of someone who had weathered years of storms. "We're grateful," she said. "Grateful for the fairness of the court, grateful for the support from those who believed in us, and grateful that this chapter is finally closing." Janelle repeated her sentiments, adding that the ruling wasn't only about money, it was about recognition. "So much of what women do in families goes unseen," she said. "This was about making sure that our years of work, dedication, and sacrifice were recognized, and today they were." Neither woman spoke of Kody by name. There was no need to. The message was obvious without it. For Kody, the loss was not just economic. It was a blow to the identity he had spent decades projecting. The identity of being in charge, of keeping the family together on his own terms. In this courtroom, control wasn't for him to exert. Here the power dynamic had completely flipped on its head, and there was nothing that could be done to alter it. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was different, lighter, freer. Christine and Janelle stood together, posing for a few photos before dividing into different cars. It was symbolic in a way, together in their struggle, yet poised to move ahead separately. As they left, the moment started to sink in. This wasn't merely a legal victory. It was confirmation. It was the concrete evidence that being an advocate for yourself, even against someone who had once had such a commanding presence in your life, is worth all the effort. The news would ripple far beyond the courtroom walls. Sister Wives fans would analyze every moment, weighing the justice of the ruling, speculating as to what it portended for Kody's future, and hailing the courage Christine and Janelle had demonstrated. Some would hail it as justice. Others would view it as the natural result of years of equilibrium. But for the two women at the center of it all, labels were irrelevant. What was relevant was that they had weathered the storm, stood firm, and emerged unscathed with their dignity intact, and the law in their favor. And perhaps that's the strongest aspect of this narrative. It wasn't simply about property lines, bank accounts, or legal speak. It was about two women who had once stood with Kody Brown in solidarity, now standing alone, stronger than ever before. They weren't defined by yesterday anymore. They were defined by the strength it took to claim tomorrow.